In the vast silence of the plains, a soul can be lost or forged. It is not the sound one makes, but the will to endure that defines the path to freedom. The cards slapped the scarred table, each one a nail in Anna's future. Her father, Morton, reeked of cheap whiskey and desperation. His eyes, once kind, were now glassy pools of defeat. Across from him sat Finch, the owner of the saloon, a man whose smile never reached his cold, calculating eyes. The air was thick with smoke and the low murmur of men who knew a soul was on the line. Finch's fingers, adorned with a single gold ring, tapped a rhythm of impatience on the wood. He was a predator, and Morton was his cornered prey. Anna stood by the wall, a ghost in a worn dress, her silence a stark contrast to the saloon's raucous noise. She could not speak, but her eyes saw everything. Finch laid down his hand, a triumphant flush of spades. A collective gasp went through the room. Morton's face crumpled, the last of his bravado draining away, leaving a hollow shell. "I have nothing left, Finch," he whispered, his voice cracking. Finch's smile widened, a cruel slash in his face. "Oh, I think you do, Morton. You have a debt to pay." His gaze shifted, landing on Anna like a physical blow. She flinched, her hands clutching the thin fabric of her dress. The saloon patrons looked away, some in pity, others in morbid curiosity. They were spectators at an execution, and her freedom was on the chopping block. Morton did not even look at her. He just nodded slowly, a broken man. Finch rose from the table and walked toward Anna. She stood frozen, a trapped doe in the path of a wolf. He stopped before her, his shadow engulfing her small frame. He smelled of stale cigars and power. "You will work here now," he said, his voice a low growl. "You belong to me until your father's debt is settled." Which meant forever. He reached out and grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. She did not make a sound, her silence her only shield. He dragged her toward the back rooms, away from the prying eyes of the crowd. The heavy saloon doors swung shut, sealing her fate within the dusty, desperate walls of the gilded cage. Her old life was over. The days that followed blurred into a nightmare of endless work. Anna scrubbed floors until her knuckles were raw, hauled heavy crates of liquor, and endured the leering stares of Finch's patrons. He treated her like property, a silent tool to be used and discarded. Her muteness was a convenience for him. She could not complain, could not cry for help. Yet, within her silent world, a fire of defiance smoldered. She watched, she listened, memorizing the faces of Finch's associates, the hushed conversations about shipments and deals. Her mind became a ledger of his sins, a silent record of every cruelty. She would not break, she would endure. Dusty sunlight streamed through the saloon's grimy windows when he first saw her. Tuma, a Comanche hunter, had come to town to trade pelts for supplies. He rarely entered the white man's establishments, but the heat of the day drove him to seek water. As he stood by the bar, his eyes were drawn to a young woman mopping the floor. She moved with a weary grace, her face a mask of stoicism. But it was her eyes that held him captive. They were pools of silent sorrow, yet deep within them, he saw an unbroken spirit, a flicker of a flame that refused to be extinguished. He felt an immediate, inexplicable connection to her silent pain. Finch barked an order, and Anna flinched, a barely perceptible tremor. Tuma's hands tightened around the cool glass of water. He observed the saloon owner, a man who oozed a greasy sort of authority. He saw the way Finch looked at Anna, not as a person, but as a possession. A quiet rage began to build in Tuma's chest. He knew this kind of man, the kind who fed on the weakness of others. He had seen it in the greedy eyes of the soldiers and the land agents who pushed his people further and further into desperation. He finished his water, his gaze lingering on Anna for a moment longer before he turned and left. The image of her resilient eyes burned into his memory. Anna felt the stranger's gaze on her. It was different from the others. It was not filled with pity or lust, but with something else, something she could not name. It was a look of understanding, of recognition. For a fleeting moment she felt seen, Truly seen, for the first time in years. When he left, the saloon felt colder, emptier. The brief connection was a small crack in the wall of her despair, letting in a sliver of light. She held on to that feeling, a secret warmth in the cold misery of her existence. It was a dangerous thing, this flicker of hope, but it was all she had. Over the next few weeks, Tuma found reasons to return to town more often than usual. He never spoke to Anna, never approached her directly. He would simply take a seat in a quiet corner of the saloon, nursing a single drink, his watchful eyes following her. He learned her routine, the rhythm of her silent suffering. He saw the bruises that sometimes appeared on her arms, the way she would shrink away from Finch's touch. Each visit hardened his resolve. This injustice could not stand. He did not know how, but he knew he had to free her from this gilded cage. Her silent strength called to his own. One evening, a drunken cowboy grabbed Anna's arm, his foul breath hot on her face. She tried to pull away, her eyes wide with panic. Before Finch could intervene with his own brand of cruel punishment, Tuma was there. He did not say a word. He simply placed his hand on the cowboy's shoulder, his grip firm and unyielding. The man turned, ready for a fight, but froze when he saw the cold fire in Tuma's eyes. There was a deadly stillness about the Comanche hunter that promised swift and terrible violence. The cowboy released Anna and stumbled away, muttering curses. Tuma's gaze met Anna's for a second, a silent promise passing between them. Finch watched the exchange from behind the bar, his eyes narrowed. He did not like anyone interfering with his property. "You have business here, Comanche?" Finch asked, his voice laced with venom. Tuma turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "Just getting a drink," he replied, his voice calm and even. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Finch studied him, taking in the lean, powerful build, the confident set of his shoulders. This was not a man to be trifled with lightly. "See that you do not cause trouble," Finch sneered, turning back to his work. But he would remember the hunter's face. Anna's heart was pounding in her chest. No one had ever stood up for her before. The hunter's quiet intervention was a shield, a moment of protection in a life devoid of it. As she went back to her work, she could feel his presence, a steady warmth at the edge of the room. She risked a glance in his direction and saw him watching her, his dark eyes filled with a fierce protectiveness. A feeling she had long forgotten began to stir within her, a fragile bud of trust. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible nod of gratitude. It was all she could give, but she knew he understood. Tuma knew he had revealed his hand. Finch was suspicious now. He could no longer be a passive observer. He began to spend more time on the outskirts of town, watching the saloon from a distance. He followed Finch's men, noting their comings and goings at odd hours of the night. He saw them meeting with rough-looking characters, exchanging heavy crates in secret. A pattern began to emerge, a web of illegal activity with Finch at its center. Tuma realized that freeing Anna would be more complicated than simply confronting Finch. To save her, he would have to dismantle the man's entire criminal enterprise. Tuma's surveillance led him to the town's stable, a place that saw more than just horses. He watched one night as Finch's men loaded unmarked wagons under the cloak of darkness. The stable hand, an old man with a limp and weary eyes, watched them too, his face a mask of resentment. Tuma recognized a potential ally. He approached the man the next day, not with questions, but with a shared silence. He offered the old man Elias a piece of dried venison. Elias accepted it, his gaze sharp and questioning. "He is a snake, that one," Elias said, his voice a low rasp, nodding toward the saloon. "He took everything from me." Elias told his story in clipped, bitter sentences. Finch had cheated him out of his savings in a rigged card game years ago, leaving him with nothing but a job shoveling manure in the stable he once dreamed of owning. He had watched Finch's operation grow, fueled by smuggling and fear. "He brings in guns," Elias confided, his voice barely a whisper. "Sells them to bandits and angry prospectors. There is a big shipment coming soon. The biggest yet." Tuma listened intently, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. This shipment was the key. It was Finch's greatest strength and his greatest vulnerability. Anna overheard two of Finch's men talking in the storeroom. They spoke in hushed, excited tones about a delivery that would make them all rich. They mentioned the name of a notorious outlaw gang and a meeting point east of the river. Fear coiled in her stomach, but she forced herself to listen, to remember every detail. This was bigger than just her own suffering. Finch was arming men who would bring death and destruction to the entire territory. She had to find a way to warn someone. But who would listen to a mute saloon girl? Her gaze drifted to the saloon doors, thinking of the quiet hunter with the protective eyes. Tuma returned to Elias with a new sense of urgency. "The shipment," Tuma said, his voice low and intense. "We must use it against him." Elias looked at the Comanche, seeing not just a warrior, but a strategist. A flicker of hope, long dormant, ignited in the old man's chest. For the first time in years, he felt a surge of purpose. "What are you proposing?" he asked. "We need a plan," Tuma replied. A way to expose him and get the girl out at the same time. Together in the dusty, hay-scented air of the stable, the two men, united by their shared enemy, began to plot Finch's downfall. The plan began to take shape, a delicate and dangerous dance of timing and deception. Elias, with his knowledge of the town and Finch's routines, was invaluable. Tuma, with his skills in stealth and combat, would be the one to act. They decided the night of the arms shipment was their only chance. The entire town would be focused on the saloon, where Finch and his men would be celebrating their new wealth. It was the perfect cover. "He gets careless when he is counting his money," Elias rasped, a grim smile on his face. "Pride will be his undoing." Tuma nodded, his mind already moving through the steps, calculating the risks. Tuma needed to get a message to Anna to let her know that help was coming. It was too risky to speak to her directly. One afternoon, while delivering supplies to the saloon's back door, Elias found his chance. Anna was there, shaking out a dusty rug. He caught her eye and, when no one was looking, he pressed a small, smooth stone into her palm. Carved into its surface was a simple image, a feather. It was a symbol of Tuma's people, a promise of freedom. Anna's fingers closed around the stone, her heart leaping with a terrifying hope. She looked at Elias, her eyes asking a silent question. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Holding the stone, Anna felt a surge of courage. The small carving was a tangible link to the world outside the saloon, a promise that she was not forgotten. That night, she moved with a renewed purpose. She paid closer attention to the layout of the saloon, the position of the guards Finch always had posted, the location of the back exit. She noted that Finch kept a small firearm hidden beneath the bar. Every detail was a potential key to her survival. She was no longer just a victim. She was a part of the plan, a silent partner in her own rescue. The weight of the stone in her pocket was a constant reminder to be brave. Tuma and Elias finalized their strategy. The main element would be a diversion, something big enough to draw every man out of the saloon. "A fire," Elias suggested, his eyes gleaming in the lantern light. "In the old hayloft. It will go up fast and bright." It was a risky move, but they had no other choice. While the town fought the blaze, Tuma would slip into the saloon and get Anna. Elias's role was just as crucial. Once Anna was safe, he would go to Sheriff Brody, a man known to be honest but cautious, and tell him everything, providing the proof of the illegal arms shipment. The stage was set. All they could do now was wait. The days leading up to the shipment were thick with tension. Finch grew more agitated, his temper flaring at the slightest provocation. He paced the saloon like a caged animal, his paranoia growing with each passing hour. He shouted at Anna for a misplaced glass, his cruelty sharpened by his anxiety. She endured it all with her usual stoicism, her hand often straying to the smooth stone in her pocket. The carved feather was her anchor in the storm of Finch's rage. She knew the time was near. She could feel it in the charged air, in the nervous energy that crackled through the saloon. She had to be ready. Tuma spent the time preparing. He checked his weapons, honed his knife, and moved through the wilderness like a ghost, his senses on high alert. He was not just fighting for Anna anymore. He was fighting against the poison that Finch represented, the greed that threatened to consume the land. He thought of Anna's eyes, of the silent strength that had called to him from across a crowded room. He would not fail her. He made a silent vow to the spirits of his ancestors, a promise that he would bring her out of the darkness and into the light, or die trying. His resolve was as hard as the ancient mountains that watched over the plains. Elias played his part perfectly. He went about his duties at the stable, his demeanor unchanged. He grumbled about his work, cursed Finch under his breath, and gave no indication of the storm that was about to break. He secretly prepared a small bundle of oil-soaked rags, hiding them in a place no one would think to look. He felt a tremor of fear, the fear of an old man risking everything, but it was overshadowed by a fierce sense of justice. He thought of the life Finch had stolen from him, and his hands grew steady. This was his chance to reclaim a piece of his dignity, to see the snake finally get what he deserved. The night arrived, cloaked in a moonless sky. The heavy wagon, loaded with crates of rifles, rumbled into town and pulled up behind the saloon. Finch and his men emerged, their faces greedy in the lantern light. The celebration began, the sound of loud laughter and clinking glasses spilling out into the dark street. From his vantage point, Tuma watched and waited. In the stable, Elias took a deep breath and struck a match. The flame flickered, small and fragile, yet holding the power to ignite a rebellion. The time for waiting was over. The time for action had come. The first cry of "Fire!" cut through the night. Flames licked the sky from the stable's hayloft, painting the dark buildings in a terrifying orange glow. Panic erupted. Men poured out of the saloon, their drunken celebration forgotten as they ran toward the blaze. Finch hesitated for a moment, his face a mask of fury and suspicion, before he too ran outside, shouting orders. It was the chaos Tuma and Elias had counted on. The street was a whirlwind of shouting men and frightened horses. The diversion was working perfectly. Now was Tuma's chance. Like a shadow, Tuma detached himself from the darkness and slipped through the saloon's swinging doors. The room was almost empty, thick with smoke and the smell of spilled liquor. A single guard, left behind by Finch, turned at the sound, his hand reaching for his weapon. But Tuma was faster. He moved with silent, fluid grace, disarming the man with a swift blow that sent him crumpling to the floor, unconscious. Tuma scanned the room, his eyes searching for Anna. He saw her standing near the back, her eyes wide, her hand clutching the small stone he had sent her. He moved toward her quickly. "Anna," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. It was the first time he had spoken her name aloud. She looked up at him, a mix of fear and relief washing over her face. There was no time for words, even if she had them. He took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. Her hand was small and cold in his. He started to lead her toward the back exit, toward the promise of freedom. The path was clear. For a moment, it seemed too easy. The roar of the fire outside and the shouts of the townsfolk provided the perfect cover for their escape. Suddenly, a voice cut through the noise. "Going somewhere?" Finch stood in the doorway to his office, a firearm in his hand, his face twisted into a triumphant sneer. Two of his most ruthless men emerged from the shadows behind him, their weapons also drawn. The saloon, which had been their path to freedom, had become a trap. Finch had not been completely fooled by the fire. He had left a nasty surprise waiting for them. "I knew you were trouble, savage," Finch spat at Tuma. "And you," he said, his cold eyes landing on Anna, "you will learn what happens to ungrateful property." Tuma reacted instantly. He pushed Anna behind him, shielding her with his body. The world seemed to slow down, the air crackling with deadly intent. "Let her go, Finch," Tuma said, his voice dangerously calm. "Your fight is with me." Finch laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "I think not. You both will pay." The room exploded in a deafening roar of gunfire. Wood splintered from the bar and tables as bullets flew. Tuma returned fire, his movements precise and economical. He was a hunter in his element, his instincts taking over. He aimed to wound, to disable, not to kill, but Finch's men were shooting with lethal intent. Tuma shoved a heavy table over, creating a makeshift barricade. He pulled Anna down behind it, her safety his only concern. A bullet grazed his shoulder, a searing line of pain, but he ignored it. He could hear Finch shouting orders, his voice filled with rage. Tuma knew they could not stay here. They were outnumbered and outgunned. He risked a glance over the table. One of Finch's men was trying to circle around them. Tuma fired, and the man cried out, clutching his leg as he fell. One down. But Finch and the other man were still a deadly threat. "We have to move," Tuma whispered, his eyes scanning for an escape route. The back door was blocked. The only way out was through the front, past Finch. It was a suicide run. As if sensing his thoughts, Anna tugged on his sleeve. She pointed toward the bar. He remembered what she had seen earlier. The weapon Finch kept hidden. While Finch was distracted, reloading, Anna scrambled from behind the table. Before Tuma could stop her, she slid behind the bar, her small frame disappearing from view. It was a move of incredible bravery, a desperate gamble. A moment later, a single shot rang out from behind the bar. Finch's remaining henchman grunted and collapsed, dropping his weapon. Finch spun around in shock, realizing his mistake. That 1 second of surprise was all Tuma needed. He burst from behind the table, charging at Finch. He slammed into the saloon owner, sending them both crashing to the floor. The firearms skittered across the room. They wrestled on the dusty floorboards. A desperate struggle of brute force. Tuma, weakened by his wound, fought with the last of his strength. He managed to land a solid blow, dazing Finch just long enough for them to escape through the swinging doors and into the chaotic night. As Tuma and Anna disappeared into the darkness, Elias found Sheriff Brody organizing the bucket brigade. "Sheriff!" Elias yelled, his voice hoarse with urgency. "It is not just a fire, it is a diversion." He quickly explained everything. The arms shipment, Finch's criminal network, the fight in the saloon. The proof is in the wagon behind the gilded cage. Brody, a man who valued order above all else, looked from the fire to Elias's desperate face. He knew the old man was no liar. He gathered a posse of deputies, their faces grim in the flickering firelight, and headed for the saloon. They found the saloon in shambles. 2 of Finch's men wounded and groaning on the floor. Finch himself was just staggering to his feet, dazed and furious. Outside, the deputies discovered the wagon, its contents confirming Elias's story. The crates were filled with brand new rifles, enough to start a small war. Finch's reign of terror was over. As the sheriff put him in irons, Finch's face was a mask of disbelief and hatred. "You will not get away with this," he snarled, but his threats were empty now. The law had finally caught up with him. Tuma led Anna to a hidden grove outside of town, a place of quiet and safety. The adrenaline faded, and the pain in his shoulder flared into a throbbing agony. He slumped against a tree, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Anna, her face etched with worry, gently tore a strip of fabric from her dress and pressed it against the wound to stop the bleeding. She worked with a quiet competence, her touch gentle and sure. For the first time in years, she was not the one being hurt. She was the one providing comfort, the one giving care. A profound shift was happening within her. She looked at him, at the man who had risked his life for her. He had seen her, not as a broken thing, but as someone worth fighting for. Her heart swelled with an emotion so powerful it felt like it would burst from her chest. She opened her mouth, her throat tight with years of disuse. A sound emerged, raspy and uncertain at first, then clearer, stronger. It was a single word, a name, spoken like a prayer into the quiet of the night. Tuma. He looked up, his pain-filled eyes widening in astonishment. And in that moment, under the vast, starry sky, her healing truly began. The journey to Tuma's village was slow, dictated by the pace of his healing. He taught her the names of the plants and the stars in the Comanche language, and she listened, absorbing every word. She began to speak more, her voice growing stronger each day. She told him about her life before the silence, about her mother's songs and the small joys of her childhood. He, in turn, shared stories of his people, their traditions, their struggles, and their deep connection to the land. They traveled through a world of vast plains and painted canyons, leaving the dust and despair of the town far behind them. When they arrived at the village, they were greeted with a quiet curiosity. Tuma's people saw the trust between the Comanche hunter and the white woman. They saw the way he cared for her, and the way her eyes, no longer filled with fear, shone with a newfound light. An elder woman, with a face like a wise, wrinkled map, took Anna under her wing, teaching her the ways of the tribe. Anna learned to bead intricate patterns, to prepare traditional foods, and to understand a culture that valued community and respect for nature above all else. She had found a home. Anna's laughter, once a forgotten memory, returned. It started as a small, hesitant sound but soon grew into a free and joyous expression of her spirit. She and Tumas spent their days together, riding across the plains, their bond deepening into a profound and unwavering love. It was a love born not of grand declarations, but of shared silence, mutual respect, and a deep understanding of the scars they both carried. In his presence, she was no longer the mute girl from the saloon. She was simply Anna, a strong and resilient woman who had found her voice and her place in the world. One evening, as they watched the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Anna took Tuma's hand. "You gave me back my voice," she said, her words clear and steady. He looked at her, his dark eyes filled with a deep affection. "You never lost it," he replied softly. "You were just waiting for the right person to listen." They stood together in the peaceful twilight, two souls from different worlds who had found solace and a shared future in each other. The silence between them was no longer one of pain, but of a perfect unspoken understanding. They were home.